This video is a sort of an aside from my usual videos, but the hot topic at the moment obviously is AI, generative AI, and the role that AI will play in education. And this gives me an opportunity to comment and to talk a bit about the importance of clarity over ideas, the importance of being clear. I'm not sure that artificial intelligence is going to solve any of the problems of education, but it ought at least prompt us to think about what we're doing. It may raise some of the fundamental questions that we put on one side and don't bother to think about. And this is a prompt, a stimulus to us to think seriously about some of the underlying questions. And of course, one of the big challenges of artificial intelligence is over the integrity of assessment. What does it mean for AI to be available to everybody, to be able to use it, for students to be able to use artificial intelligence to polish their answers, to produce work that's not strictly speaking their own, or which they've only contributed to in some kind of uncertain sort of way. But before we can answer that question, we need to look back at basics, and that's the kind of work that I think you and we as researchers should be doing. We should be saying, well, okay, we're concerned. There's a real concern here. There's something that's of importance to us about what role can and should artificial intelligence play in assessment, particularly in higher education, I suppose, where it's going to be more obvious, or perhaps not. Maybe it's in schools where it will be hardest to detect. If doctoral students are expected to produce original thinking, maybe that is the hardest area for AI to compete. AI might be much more suited to the kind of general secondary education where producing a right answer is the important thing. So let's think though, go back to, and the question we ought to be asking here, I think, the question that we don't talk about because we don't talk about learning in educational research, and the word learning very rarely comes to our minds when we think about educational research. What are we doing when we assess students? What's the point of assessing a student? Well, there are several different answers to that question. I mean, there are institutional answers. Institutions award certificates, and the certificates are in some kind of warranty that the institution is saying they've tested the students' capabilities and they have prepared to guarantee the students are competent in those particular areas. But that's not why I assess students. So let's think about what we're doing when we assess students. Let's have a careful look at artificial intelligence in assessment in education. What role does education play? So let me go back to what I think I'm doing when I'm involved in teaching. And what I think I'm doing is I'm involved in a process that was described by Vygotsky. And Vygotsky described the learning process, or described the educational process, as two cycles. There is an interpersonal cycle. Now, the interpersonal cycle is public. It's between me and my students, it's between you and me, it's between I'm putting on display certain skills, I'm showing you this technology, I'm talking about my experience, I'm offering you ways of interpreting education. I'm looking at things and presenting them in public. And that, Vygotsky argues, is all higher mental functions start in public. They start in observable memorials, diaries, lists, catalogues that make available certain ways of ordering the world, make available certain ways of seeing ourselves. This is the area in which I'm offering you new insights, I'm offering you theories. I'm going to talk today about some particular educational theory. In this case, today I'm talking about Vygotsky, and I'm showing you how I think Vygotsky makes education intelligible. That's all out there. You may or may not have a clear understanding of Vygotsky before I start talking with you, but in the course of that public performance, you'll be guided towards certain ways of seeing things that you hadn't thought about before. That's our hope. Our hope is that, I'm to use the words that are commonly used in relation to Vygotsky, I'm trying to identify the space where you can move to next, the space you can't get to by yourself, but through conversation with me, you can come to understand Vygotsky better. And I'm trying to identify the zone of proximal development, the zone in which you're going to be able to operate tomorrow or the day after with a bit of help, and that bit of help I'm going to call scaffolding, and that's all available in the public domain. And if that was all that was involved in education, education would be interesting as a kind of conversation, but wouldn't lead anywhere further. The important point for me and for Vygotsky is that this first cycle is followed by a second cycle. And that second cycle is an intrapersonal cycle. It's what happens after the video's finished, after my performance is finished, after we've finished talking. You will go away and you will think about and reflect upon what's happened, what you've seen, what you've heard, what you've been thinking in the class, whatever it is that you've got, whatever's been done in the interpersonal cycle, you will take away and you will reflect on it. And those things that you find useful, those things that occur to you as important insights, you will make part of your own mental repertoire. You'll be thinking about how they fit into your way of thinking. You'll be thinking where you can apply them in future. You'll be spotting examples in the future, and you'll say, oh yes, that's interesting instance of that theory that I saw on a video. So you'll be making it part of your own mental equipment. And this is, Vygotsky says, how we develop higher mental functions. Now, where then does assessment fit in? Well, assessment fits in this sense. I've talked to you about Vygotsky, I've talked to you about other educational theories perhaps, and you've produced a piece of work, an assignment, a video, I don't know, whatever you want to produce that shows you have understood. Now, I have certain professional standards. My view is there are good pieces of writing, there are bad pieces of writing. There are good ways of using references, there are poor ways of using references, there are good ways of structuring arguments, and there are poor ways of structuring arguments. There are thoroughly argued developments of intellectual ideas, and there is sloppy presumptions, assumptions, jumping to conclusions, all of which I regard as second-rate. And in assessment, assessment has a teaching function. All assessment has a teaching function. It's not simply that there is formative assessment and summative assessment, and only formative assessment can be educational. Summative assessment that comes at the end, you've handed in the assignment, it's finished, but I am going to use it as an opportunity for demonstrating what I believe are important professional research standards. I'm going to give you a high mark if you reach those standards, and I'm going to give you a low mark if I think you've fallen down in some areas, and I will give you feedback as to why you have not got a high mark. I'm quite happy to discuss what makes a good mark, what a good mark is given for, what a poor mark is given for, and what you can do to improve work. All of that is part of the assessment process after the mark has been given. And colleagues and other people complain that students only look at the mark. They're only interested in the mark. And that defeats the whole purpose. No, it doesn't defeat the whole purpose. The student has to be interested in the mark they get first. But then, if they start asking, why did I get this mark rather than any other mark, they're going to be getting into that intrapersonal cycle where they are starting to internalise my standards, their assessor's standards of what counts as professional practice. So a student who is only interested in the mark is not failing to benefit. It's not a job not done, it's a job half done. And the reflection on the mark, the reflection on the assessment process, particularly the reflection on the criteria that are used in assessing, is where the true learning, this is where the soul and spirit of a researcher is formed, when they see and internalise the standards of their supervisor, the standards of their mentor, the standards of their assessor. This is where the spirit of research is passed from one generation to the next. So where does AI fit into this? Well, AI looks at the average of the way people express themselves, looks at the way that things are written, looks at the way that results are presented, and mimics it. And that's kind of producing the lowest common denominator. AI produces some really very poor approximations to research methods. Now, it may get better. Let's hope it gets better. But it can only get better if it starts reading better research papers. And it doesn't, at the moment, distinguish. It only looks at what's most usually done. This is a question of Bayesian probabilities. What's the most likely way of expressing this particular point in a research report? And I'm looking for more than that in my students, and I'm looking for more than that in research. I'm not looking for ideas that I can come across in any glossy magazine. I'm looking for somebody who's done serious research, who's interrogated questions seriously, and who has taken a position and argued a case. And that's what I expect from my students. And AI is actually very bad at performing some of those functions. We know, for example, the examples that are most clearly obvious in the failings of AI are the invention of references that don't exist. Well, bad researchers have always done that. Bad researchers have always faked their results. Bad researchers have always relied on the fact that people, for the most part, will not be bothered to go back and check the details of their data, the details of their resources. and some very prominent researchers have got away with it for years. The point about it is that this is in the modus operandi of artificial intelligence. So if we accept that poor practice is the norm, then we will find it increasingly difficult to identify when AI should be penalised. But if we simply say poor practice is poor practice, and whether it's produced with the help of AI or not, we're simply going to give it a poor grade, we're going to give it a low mark, or we're going to fail it, then I think the issue of whether AI is being used or not becomes less relevant. It's poor practice to simply refer to a paper without explaining what it adds to your argument. It's poor practice to use a reference that's very difficult to find. It's poor practice to use a reference that is a web resource that by the time the paper you've written is published, the links have rotted and people can't find the work that you're referring to. All of those things are bad practice. They're bad practice that AI adopts because they are common practice. And if AI is doing things that are common practice but are poor practice, well, we ought to be calling that out. We ought not to be blaming it on AI. We ought to be saying it's poor practice in the round. In all cases, that's poor practice. And we ought to be aiming to improve the level and the quality of all research papers and all research arguments. And if we do that, then the quality of work produced by AI will improve, and our life of distinguishing between task of distinguishing between what's produced by AI and what isn't will become more difficult. But what a result! All research will get better, and that's what we should be focusing on, not on whether AI is being used or not to produce mediocre work of, generally speaking, relatively little interest. There you are. It's the output, it's the judgment of assessing whether the piece of work is good or not that counts. That's what the student should be held accountable for. Can they recognise good work when they see it, and are they turning in what everybody believes to be good work? And if I set an assignment that can be aced by an artificial intelligence system, then I've probably set the wrong assignment.